I make a game in a 24-hour time budget, but there is a twist. I have to build the game based around a random asset pack. The way it works is simple. I ask ChatGPT for a random word, and whatever it gives me, I have to search in the Unreal Marketplace. From the search results, I can then choose an asset pack myself, but it does need to be clearly related to the word given. It is time to find out what word we're working with. ChatGPT, do your worst. Butterfly. Alright, let's see what there is. What is this? Monsters Forest 2, not yet rated. That's reassuring. There are butterflies. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 butterflies. Having looked through quite a few, I like this one because I think you can do quite a lot with the butterflies, despite there only being 4. But there's other stuff in the pack to help build a game around it. If you had a 24-hour time budget and this asset pack, based around butterflies, what game idea would you want to pursue? Let me know in the comments. I'm really interested to see what directions other people would go in, and I'll pin my favourite one. Anyway, I really need to get started because I've only got 20. All games need a design. Here's mine, but no one wants to read that, so let me paint a picture for you. The game will be called Butterfly Island, and you play as this fella. Equipped with your trusty net, you explore a forested island in search for butterflies to put in your scrapbook. It's casual, it's cozy, it's cute, but watch out for the evil bush monsters. I don't have a better name for them, but they want to stop you. You explore, you beat enemies, and you collect butterflies. That's our core gameplay loop. The win state is your goal of trying to collect all 10 butterflies spread around the island. You can't lose the game, but you can die. The player will have 3 hearts, and when they are hit, they lose a heart. You lose all 3 hearts, and you respawn back at the spawn point of the island. In order to defeat enemies, the player has to jump on top of them, and they will die, very much like Mario. And the forest will be put together via PCG, which is procedural content generation. It's really cool, I'll show you some more on that later, and custom assets. We've got a gameplay loop, we've got a win state, we've got a lose state in that there isn't really one, and we know the general vibe we're going for. Let's split that into categories, and this is what we have to do. The time is going to be a challenge. The first hour is already up though, so let's actually do something. Let's start with our player character, since everything revolves around it. We want to have the right mesh and the right animation so he can idle, walk, and jump. We'll get these different states set up in an animation blueprint. If the character has velocity, play the move animation. If not, play the idle. There is no jump in the asset pack, so his move is also his jump, but I quite like his derpy legs swinging in the air. It's kind of cute, but he's missing something. A net. I get a fairly simple net mesh put together quite quickly, we'll sort the textures out later, set up a simple swing animation, and then get that attached to the character via a socket on the skeleton. Now the net bobs around with the character. Very nice. The net's key ingredient is the butterflies. Same process again with the animation blueprint. The big difference here is that we don't control the butterflies. They need to move on their own. To do that, we're going to use the nav mesh. We can generate random points on the nav mesh within a given radius and use that as the location goal for the butterflies, therefore producing random localized points. Now we have a butterfly flying around, the only natural thing to do is to capture it. This will be driven via simple collision overlaps. If the net's spherical collision volume overlaps with a butterfly, we'll run a catch butterfly event. I originally had the butterfly play a die animation, but I decided I preferred it without. I did make a mental note at this point, but I would like to improve the net swinging. I think it works fine as it is, but I would like it to have an extra level of engagement to it in the same way Animal Crossing does. But let's see if we get time. 1 butterfly won't do on Butterfly Island though. We need 10 of them, and they need to look different. I used material instances to create different types, but I also baked an ID mask via vertex colors using Blender and Substance. This gave me control over specific parts of a butterfly for better customization. There were a couple other things within the material as well, like emissive features for butterflies like the Galaxy one. And in the end, this is what we had: Golden, Earth, Emerald, Forest, Galaxy, Glowing, Night, Fire, Royal, and Sky. I take a short break from the player and butterflies to do some UI since it's going to intertwine with a lot of the events happening. I bash together a quick scrapbook in Photoshop and I use the butterfly silhouettes as empty scrapbook spaces. I get all those UI icons in Engine and start setting up the event to update the scrapbook. I use a map array to tie a tag and an integer together, and then via a selection node, that integer is linked with an event. So a tag is linked to an event, essentially. I wasn't really happy with the overall feel of the scrapbook though. It's early on, but it all felt a bit too stiff, so I made a bonus goal of trying to improve the general UX, or user experience of the scrapbook. Hopefully we'll have time to actually implement this because I do think it's important. I also set up other UI elements to flesh out the HUD more with the heart icons and the player icon. The big difference with our enemy here is that we need it to move a little more advanced than the butterflies do. They need to move randomly in a kind of patrol state, chase the player when it is seen, and then stop chasing the player if it loses sight. The random movement is the same as previously shown for the butterflies, but for the chasing we use a pawn sensing component. This basically allows the enemy to see the player, and upon seeing the player, an event can be triggered such as chase the player. I set up some events, delays, and played around with how often the pawn sensor should update, and that eventually resulted in enemies giving up when they could no longer see me. I don't feel comfortable not being able to kill the enemies though, so let's do something about that. As I said in the plan, we're going Mario style on this, and jumping on their heads. A simple collision overlap check and a launch carriage. Yeah, that's too much. So when you overlap, you get a little bounce off, and you kill the enemy. We do need some better visual feedback for when you hit an enemy though, so I set up a dynamic material instance. This is basically an instance of the material which allows you to control its parameters when the game is running, otherwise known as runtime. So in this case we control the emissive intensity of a glowing Fresnel I set up in the material. It looks like this.
He's already dead!
I added a little more visual polish to the effect with some divers and it was working pretty well. The enemies didn't pose any threat because they couldn't hurt me. They literally don't have an event for it, so let's fix that. I set up an attack state for the enemy so an animation plays and an overlap check is done. The player then has a take damage event which will call an update on the UI widget for the hearts, and we reuse the same hit indicator stuff for the player. It's all about that visual feedback. I put together a speedy variation which, as the name suggests, moves quicker, attacks a bit quicker, and is a little smaller, therefore a little harder to jump on. I then put together this fat bastard, which is a king variation. They move slower but hit harder, dealing 2 hearts worth of damage. Besides bug fixes, tweaks along the way, and the spawning of them, but let's forget about that, the enemies are done, so we can cross that section off. The only remaining major functionality for the player is dying and respawning, so let's race through that. Essentially, if the player has 0 hearts, a vignette will give visual feedback that they have been knocked out, and their location will be set back to wherever the player starts. Then their hearts are refilled to free. Sweet and simple. At this point, I'm feeling pretty good about it all. The core functionality and loop of the game is done. Not feeling super concerned about time right now, but I'm aware I'm going into the artwork next, and I know full well how long it can sometimes take. Now it's on to the asset work, which is pretty much foliage work since that's mostly all we need. To do this, I'm going to create high poly meshes, bake them onto a plane, and then using those baked mesh maps, texture it. This will result in something you call an atlas sheet or an atlas texture. It is essentially a texture in which you sample parts of it to create your meshes, so it's perfect for foliage. So for my atlas sheet I made 2 pine tree fronds to create pine trees, 4 leaves for various use, a bush fern style leaf for one of the bush variations, and a flower head. With our high poly meshes we bake them in the oven and get the maps we need to texture. I intend on keeping the style pretty clean, soft and colourful, so for the texture I mostly stuck with vibrant colours, brushstroke style blending and bright highlights to make things pop. With our atlas sheet constructed, we can now start sampling from it to construct our foliage pieces. I manually place each frond and leaf, giving it some natural looking variation in its transforms, and we end up with our intended set of foliage. I've made quite a lot of foliage before, but I haven't created a tree in this handcrafted manual approach before. Same for this style of stylized bush actually. So for something a little new and given the time constraints, I think it went pretty well. Still feeling pretty good at the halfway point. At the 12-hour mark, I continued my journey with the foliage by creating some grass. I kept this simple and created 4 clusters of blades for variation. With all the foliage and engine, it was time to get the shader set up. I set up a few texture controls, such as layering the AO map onto the base colour for more depth, controlling normal intensity, subsurface scattering, and I also set up some wind. The wind motion is quite simple, but it's masked out via the X coordinate of the texture, so the roots of each leaf or frond don't move. It's a little extra detail to keep the wind motion a little more grounded. I was getting claustrophobic in that test level though, and I needed to spread my wings. I've been looking at leaves way too long. So I made an island. The island was made using a water plugin in Unreal Engine, so it's nice and quick to do. Although I did set up the lighting, which will tweak over time as the island develops. I promised PCG content at the start, and PCG content you shall have. It provides a node-based approach to sampling points within your scene, which is represented by these cubes you can see. Using these points you can do various things like filters, noise, grid patterns, change for transforms, etc. But in this case we sample points to distribute our 2 tree variations. From these 2 tree variations we get a distribution of local points surrounding them to populate the ground with our 2 bush variations. And quite quickly we've got a forest coming together, and the great thing is, because it's procedural, it's quite easy to make adjustments on the fly. The landscape was flat and boring, so I did some quick sculpting of it and set the PCG graph to correctly adapt to the angles of the landscape. Speaking of landscape, it's still boring. So let's get some basic mud and grass on there. I continued in a procedural fashion by setting up a mask within my material which detected slopes in the landscape. These slopes will be made of mud and everything else grass. I had controls for this so I could fine tune it. I also set up some world aligned variation in the colours so you had patches of variation spread throughout the terrain. It helped a lot in keeping it interesting despite being really simple. Now, things have been going pretty well up to now, right? Time is ticking away but progress is solid and I've maintained pace well so far. Well, that's all going to change, because let me introduce you to grass. I had an image in my head of what the grass would look like, and I knew how to approach it. Let me repeat that. I knew how to approach it. I would use RVT, which is Runtime Virtual Texturing. This system, amongst other things, allows textures to be read and written at runtime. What this basically means is textures can be sampled from one material to another. So, in this case, I would sample the ground colour and pass it on to the grass colour. Therefore, you get a nice blend of gradients and colours throughout the grass. I didn't sleep too great that night and I was reaching the end of a longer work session. I was tired and I wasn't thinking straight. I was so conscious of the time on my first attempt of applying the RVT to the grass not quite working how I wanted it to. I gave up and decided to keep pushing in a different direction. It was go, go, go. If it didn't work, I moved on. And so I proceeded to chase my own tail, trying to achieve a particular look with the grass, which I simply wasn't going the right way about. However, during this, I did also decide that the ground was too flat, so I laid over some light rocky crack normals for some interest. I adjusted the lighting, set up the post-processing, and I also set up the spawning of the enemies and butterflies. Enemies have spawner blueprints, which are placed via the PCG graph over the island, so it's fairly randomised, and the butterflies are spawned from a single spawner blueprint, which samples random points of a nav mesh to spawn each type of butterfly. Very similar to the nav mesh point stuff we did earlier. But the main thing was the grass. Lots of tweaking and lots of concern. The main thing was that it could potentially drag the overall aesthetic down, both in terms of general quality but also style. This is where I got it sitting after a while and it's not bad. It just wasn't what I wanted and I was too tired to think straight with it. So I went to bed. And I woke up with one thing on my mind. Grass. It was bothering me too much. I'm sure some of you watching might be able to relate to the feeling you have when you know something in your project just isn't what you want it to be. It's kind of hard to leave it alone. If you know what I mean, comment down below. Luckily, though, I had slept better that night and I was ready to approach this the right way. So I revisited my original plan, as I should have done in the first place instead of being in such a rush. It's just like the hare and the tortoise. I should have listened. I didn't really have time to spare, but I knew I could make big strides forward quickly. I spent 30 minutes doing some visual tweaking. Bit of a list here, but let's fly through it. I updated the grass mesh normals to actually be facing fully upwards so the shading was uniform. I set up the RVT properly for the grass, and while there is some artifacting, it's generally not noticeable, and the grass was much softer now. The landscape colours were also updated since they essentially controlled the grass colour as well, so we had much nicer shades running through the land. There was also another problem bugging me with the shiny glare on the ground. You might have noticed it. It was caught by the sun so much more in the distance, so I set up a mask using the pixel depth. With this, I set it so the roughness of the landscape increased the further away it was from the camera. A little bit of a hacky fix, but hey, it works. I also made some camera angle improvements, adjusted the PCG graph so the forest was a little denser, and boosted the saturation and contrast so the colours were more vibrant. And now I could relax a little bit more. The visuals were sitting more in line with what I wanted, soft, vibrant and stylized, generally better balanced with less issues. We can all relax now. Except we have the rest of the UI work, which is basically everything not on the hood, full audio source and implementation, the net asset to finish, and hopefully trying to improve the general UX of the scrapbook because it's still a little stiff, plus anything else which just happens to crop up because this is game dev. Oh, and we only have 6 hours left. Whilst there was a lot of untouched content to do, I decided to prioritise the UX of the scrapbook next. More and more, it just felt like a necessity rather than a nice bonus goal. So I got together some simple animations within the widget for the scrapbook opening and the butterflies being caught. I also made a little message for when you caught a butterfly which shared what type you would caught. I know, the gaps between the different text bothers me as well. Nonetheless, catching a butterfly generally felt less static now, and the overall experience of it had a bit more life and bounce to it. It's not perfect, but a neat little improvement. Continuing down the path of UI work, I got a pause menu set up, a main menu with a nice little game title, and a congratulations message, because there's nothing quite like finishing a game and being told well done. And I also set up some basic graphic preset options. Setting up proper graphical settings can be really quite time consuming, but I felt it was important to provide some basic options in order to allow a wider range of specs to run the game. There was actually more UI stuff than I had anticipated. Remember me saying things will pop up? It happened, so I had once again knocked audio work even further back. I also still had those net swing mechanic improvements in the back of my mind, but the biggest worry I had was not leaving enough time to test the game, and most importantly, not leaving enough time to make changes if I needed to. Heading into the 20th hour, I had a soundless game, and I couldn't have that, so it was finally time to get some audio. I used Upbeat Premium to source all the audio for this game. Upbeat, I'm available for sponsors, just throwing it out there. And I managed to find most of the stuff I wanted. I did, however, need to make some minor edits / layer different sounds together to get the right kind of feel. Most of the time was spent finding the right sounds and then just getting them in Engine. For the implementation, most of it was done via blueprints, plain 2D sounds, but there were also footstep sounds done via an animation notified blueprint. Don't know why I struggled to say that so much. Anim notified blueprint. And then some general forest ambience done as 3D sounds within the actual world. This was definitely the time for finally doing the important stuff because I finally also textured the net. The downside was that I accidentally broke the net by making it shrink whenever it swung. I'll fix it in a bit, don't worry about it. Yep. You've got 1 hour left? Alright, yeah, okay. Wait, what? The final hour. It was time to panic.
Oh my god! Okay, it's happening!
It was time to realise all the things I had left to do.
Stay calm!
Or things I had just forgotten to do. Like how I realised I never actually tell the player the controls for the game. So I fixed this by adding some simple player control diagrams to the HUD. Besides WASD for movement, there's only 2 buttons, so I was hoping it would be intuitive, but nonetheless it felt wrong to not have the controls somewhere on the screen. Most of the other work before testing was just fixing a couple of bugs and making a few final tweaks. I made the bush mesh normals a little softer. Wow, say bush mesh normals 5 times fast. And I fixed the shrinking net issue. This looks fixed, right?
Yeah.
And made some adjustments to the PCG graph. There was something missing though. It fell off. The island felt empty without something. I couldn't use this asset pack and not include the pig. It was too important. But in all seriousness, whilst I do like the pig and wanted to include him, they did actually serve a bit of a purpose. The island felt a little lonely. Including these pigs running around with the nets made you feel like you were part of the world. I think it's a great tool of immersion to make the player feel like they have become a piece of the living world and not necessarily that they themselves are the world or that it revolves around them. Maybe I'm reading into it too much for a 24-hour game, but that's my justification for the pigs. He is way too eager to be catching butterflies. Holy shit, where are you going? Anyway, with them in and at an appropriate speed, it was time to package and playtest the full game for the first time. The biggest worry I had was not leaving enough time to test the game, and most importantly, not leaving enough time to make changes if I needed to. It had happened. There were some problems, and I was really running out of time. There were some major bugs. The first was that the collection message sometimes didn't remove itself after collecting a butterfly, so you had it on screen the whole time. The next was that the butterflies weren't spawning across the whole island. And finally, this is the best, there was an issue with the enemy spawning and performance. There wasn't a cap to how many could spawn, and they had nothing to kill the enemy after a certain period of time, unless the player went on a giant massacre, and so the amount of enemies would slowly increase the cost on the game thread over time. To summarise, the longer you played the game, the worse your performance got. It's an extra layer of challenge. I expect the Souls-like genre to really adopt this model in the near future. These are all bugs which needed fixing. I couldn't leave a game with them still in place if they were game breaking in one way or another. There was, however, another issue. It's not a bug though. It was a general design flaw. The first half of catching the butterflies mostly delivered on the experience of an easygoing, chilled adventure. It's the second half of catching the butterflies when there are fewer of them. After a while, it became a bit tedious and mindless. You could only really walk around and hope for the best once you'd been around the island a couple of times. There needed to be something within that process which took away some of the senseless searching and created more guidance. And I needed a quick to implement solution ASAP. My first instinct upon seeing the pigs was to actually talk to them. Don't know why. Where are the butterflies? Where are the butterflies? Hello, where are the butterflies at? You can probably see where this is going. Halfway through me being stupid and asking the pigs for directions, I thought that might not be a crazy idea. So when the player is reaching that point of frustration, they have something to fall back on. So I jumped back in engine and set up some logic so that periodically the pigs would locate a random butterfly and make a beeline towards it. So the pigs would either be wandering or tracking. This was a rushed solution, so there's some important things I feel I'm missing, such as visual or audio feedback that they are in tracking mode. Or you could even take this further and make it so you have to kill enemies to get coins, which you could spend on the pigs tracking down butterflies and doing so quite accurately. Had I playtested the gameplay loop much sooner into the process, maybe a more fleshed out implementation of this could have been made. I'll comment a bit more on this soon. Despite being a rush solution, it did help. I played through the game in a much more appropriate amount of time and with less frustration. I had less of a lost feeling and felt like I had something to fall back on. It's not perfect, but it helped, and it was an extremely last minute addition. Which does bring me on to a small confession I have to make. I did go over the time by 20 minutes. I am very sorry. I do, however, have something as a way of apology. I made a little trailer for the game. Hopefully you accept this and we can all forget about those extra 20 minutes I needed to, quite frankly, save the game. If you do like the look of the game, or you're simply curious to see how much you can break it, whatever your motivation is, it is available to download for free over on my itch.io page, where I'll be uploading projects like this one for you to get your hands on for free. The link is in the description, so feel free to go check it out. I think this challenge was a really good highlight of the importance of testing a game loop ASAP. Even just in a 24-hour period of development, the impact of it could still be felt in the final game. But I did really enjoy the challenge of using a random asset pack, and I really hope you also enjoyed the video. If you did, do consider dropping a like. It really does go a long way in letting other people see it who might also enjoy this content. And if you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind. Thank you for watching, and if you do want to see more, then click something on screen. There'll probably be something there. Just, click it. Thank you. Bye.